views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to journalists and writers and editors, sometimes filmmakers. Tonight we're going to talk to an author, people who put stuff out in and about the Bronx, and kind of give you a clue as to what they're thinking about, what they're got in their mind as they put stuff out, so you can get a little more insight as to the buzz in the Bronx. And to start off this evening, let me say good evening to Parker Quinlan. Parker, let's see, he's with the Mott Haven Herald, but he's written and participated in all kinds of stuff. Nice to have you with us, Parker.
Thank you.
Just a little bit about your background. Now, we haven't had you on the program before, so let's just talk about who you are and how'd you get to the point where you're at the Mott Haven Herald?
Yeah, so right now I'm a student at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism, and I cover mostly sort of topics of criminal justice and a little bit of politics. I started to cover politics in the South Bronx when I really started to work in the Mott Haven Herald, but my sort of passion is like criminal justice and politics. And so I sort of work in both of those fields. And I never had really been to the South Bronx or the Bronx in general before I even started to work for the Mott Haven Herald. I live in Brooklyn. I'm in Crown Heights right now. But when I started to work for the Mott Haven Herald, I really got a sense of the issues and what's going on up there. And so it really sort of changed a lot of my perspective on reporting and how to sort of tell stories in communities like the South Bronx.
Well, we're always interested, and one of the values of this program is in people who come from other places, and you know they get to look at our hometown. The Bronx often struggles with its identity, especially in the eyes of people from elsewhere. I'd like to think that some of your kind of inspiration and energy in writing about the Bronx is that you're learning about, like, I'm going to put words in your mouth, what an incredible place it actually is, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
I mean, fill in the blank there. Why do you feel that way? I mean, I know
Right.
that you feel that way based on what you're writing.
Yeah, no. I mean,
what have you learned coming to the Bronx?
Listen, there's a lot of resilient people in the South Bronx, right? And that's the one thing, especially with the reporting that we've done post-COVID, is there is a kind of resiliency among the sort of the people that work in the South Bronx, that live in the South Bronx. They are some of the sort of hardest fighters and the biggest advocates for New York City in general. And that's the one thing that I noticed is even in places, even when people are abandoning the rest of the city, right? There's a lot of folks in the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side that are moving out into the suburbs now. There's a lot of sort of transition in the city post like sort of pandemic. Folks in the South Bronx are there to stay, right? And that's the one thing that I think speaks to that community better than any other place in the city, is they are the truest essence of what it means to be a New Yorker. And that's what I sort of really appreciate, just learning about the folks that live there and talking to sources. They really embody a lot of what it means to be a hardworking New Yorker.
Well, I'll tell you, I hope my friends and neighbors in the Bronx listen very closely, because they will all agree. I mean, and you know, at least some of the history. I mean, you know,
Sure.
their neighborhoods, certainly in the South Bronx, were just, you know, essentially leveled. They wanted to, write off those people for dead, and because they stayed. And of course, we have a group called Nos Quedamos, which is we stay, and it really was almost at the beginning of this movement where it was almost like, we're not going to take it from anybody else. We'll just take care of our own business.
Exactly.
So for me, that was really a joy to hear what you said. Let's talk a little bit about how COVID has affected politics. I mean, I know because, and people who watch BronxNet know, I moderate a lot of the political debates. And, you know, on my other program, Bronx Talk, we get very involved in a lot of the political activities. With a primary coming on June 23rd, this thing basically shut down the whole, political campaign movement. You can't stand in the subway. You can't give out leaflets. I mean, there's just a million things that can't happen. So let's talk about that piece that you wrote about what political strategies are out there that people are now employing.
Yeah, so a lot of folks are a lot of the campaigns, and in that piece, I specifically focused on the congressional race in the 15th. One of the things that we really noticed is a lot of campaigns are having to shift to online canvassing, like online campaigning, online sort of social media driven campaigns. And it's not a sort of campaign style that a lot of candidates are used to, particularly in the South Bronx. A lot of folks really respond to what we call retail politics, right? Being able to shake a politician's hand, look them in the face, talk about the issues. You're not really able to do that now, right? Because you have to keep socially distant. You've got to sort of stay a certain number of feet apart. You can't really like shake people's hands anymore. And so a lot of these campaigns are having a hard time adjusting. And that really affects every impact or every part of what it means to run a modern campaign, right? Fundraising is done that way. Outreach is done that way. And a lot of campaigns are just having a hard time trying to adapt in figuring out how to run a campaign while at the same time keeping their voters engaged.
I'm going to give you a couple of angles on this. Number one, that would suggest that people maybe who are more experienced and have legislative backgrounds, like Melissa Mark Viverito or Michael Blake or Richie Torres, people like that, have a little more infrastructure. They have somebody running their social media. They have an idea of how to do a little bit of outreach. On the other hand, people like, let's say, Semelis Lopez and Julia Pabon, who have people infrastructure and social media infrastructure, they also could do very well. It's hard to see how this will affect in the long run.
Well, to push back on that a little bit, there's one name that you didn't mention that a lot of folks are floating around as a front runner, who is really only going to get in on name recognition, and that's Ruben Diaz Sr. His name ID in the South Bronx is so high. There's a lot of folks. Richie Torres, for example, has raised more money than anyone else in that race. But he, in his campaign and a lot of other campaigns, are concerned that fundraising is not going to be enough. A lot of it's going to come down to who did you know before the campaign started? Who did you know before the pandemic? And a lot of folks are concerned that Ruben Diaz's name ID alone is going to be enough to push him over in a primary race.
Well, I will agree that the name, and of course it is a little interesting that it doesn't say Reverend Ruben Diaz or Ruben Diaz Sr. on the ballot. It says Ruben Diaz, and there are people who are saying, oh, wow, the borough president is running for Congress, which he's not. Yes, certainly the vote could split, but I'm going to throw one caveat in there. In 99.9% of the cases in the Bronx, the Democratic primary is the answer to your question. Who's going to win? But there is also a working families party candidate who will challenge if it is Reverend Diaz, maybe in any circumstance. Will challenge all the way till November. That candidate is Semelis Lopez. Yeah. So even if he wins that primary, unlike other races, it's not likely that it's all over. I'm not saying yes or no either way, but so that will be interesting. I want to move ahead to you did participate in the first debate. Now I will tell you, today we're shooting this on Wednesday. Bronx Buzz will air on Thursday. On Friday, we will be recording at least 9, if not 10, of the candidates in another virtual debate in the 15th CD, and then that'll be on BronxNet, on Bronx Talk on Monday night. So what was your impression of what you saw since you were part of that debate that was run by City Limits and the Gotham Gazette and some others? Go ahead.
The exchanges were very hard for a lot of candidates. I think in a normal debate environment, your candidates are used to being able to attack and talk over each other. You can't do that in a sort of Zoom format. One of the things we saw was when you finish up your 2 minutes or however long, your mic gets cut and that's it, right? You can't keep talking. And so it's very difficult, I think, for candidates to sort of prepare themselves for the technological impetus of working on a debate online.
Let me just interject. So that's a little clue to me to how to handle it. And I know that I'm much better in a room with people than handling it in this way. it's a bit of a challenge. But that would also suggest to me that the people with experience, people who have been in the city council, people who have debated, in the state assembly, like Michael Blake, have a bit of an advantage. It doesn't matter where they are; they know how to speak and speak within time and all that kind of thing. Let's also talk about just in general your impressions of how politics will change, or will it change in the South Bronx as a result of what we're all going through? Maybe even talking about some of the issues that are going to be emphasized.
Right. I think that one of the major issues is going to be small businesses, right? One of the things that we saw from the federal response with the coronavirus outbreak and pandemic is small businesses in the South Bronx are going to have a hard time coming back. And there have already been some state assembly hearings that sort of deal with this in a sort of relative way. The federal government's response, they tried to give money to small businesses, but as we saw, not all small businesses got it. And some of them that did get it are going to have a hard time paying those loans back. It's going to be a difficult and uphill fight. A lot of folks in the South Bronx rely on small businesses. And when a lot of them are closed, a lot of them aren't generating revenue for themselves. Some of them are going to close. And we're going to have a hard time, I think, bridging that gap between rebuilding the South Bronx after this is over and being able to encourage small businesses to continue.
Because there are finances involved that may need to come from the outside. Before we run out of time, I want to talk about, you have a website, right? South Bronx Acts, ACTS, South Bronx Acts. Tell me what that's all about.
So as part of our continuing coverage on the coronavirus, our publication decided to highlight some of the most folks that we think have been pivotal in responding to the coronavirus. And so our publication, through our reporters, have identified a number of folks that we think identify the sort of South Bronx spirit and who have had a lot of success in responding to the COVID crisis. One of the folks that we profiled is someone named Derek Lewis, right? And he, in his sort of public-private partnership, has been able to raise upwards of about $4 million for coronavirus response relief efforts. And he and his organization have managed to spend some of that money on food relief. They bought computers for students, the low-income students that need it for school. And their organization is trying to also raise money for small businesses as well. And so essentially what we're looking at is who were what we're terming the sort of heroes of the South Bronx in this pandemic.
And so we're almost out of time, Parker. So people can go, the website is South Bronx Acts.
Yep.
And find out more stuff about. How often do you post stuff up? Like you do one a week or whenever they come up, or how does it work?
We have finished the reporting for that. And so we have finished all the profiles. And so the profiles are complete. And you can go and look at the website. You can go and see who's up there now. If we have more profiles, we'll add them, but I'm not anticipating that we will. So yeah, by all means, go check it out.
Definitely check it out. Listen, Parker, thank you so much for joining us. This is Parker Quinlan from the Mott Haven Herald. I like you, and as somebody who has been involved in Bronx media for a very long time, after your stint at the Mott Haven Herald is up, stick around. We need you. So anyway, good luck in all you do. I hope you'll make it a point to come on back with us. How long are you going to be with Mott Haven Herald in your graduate school education?
Not for much longer. I'll probably still contribute reporting to them, particularly through the election, but it just depends. If something bigger comes along, I might go there. So
we like you here in the Bronx, and I hope that you continue to cover our stuff here because you have a point of view that I think we really need. Thank you so much. Folks, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, it'll be an author. We're going to talk about a new book. He's written a ton of stuff about the Bronx. He's a former teacher. And so stick around. We're going to do that right after this.
most at risk for coronavirus. People over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people, avoid crowds, stay home if you can, wash your hands frequently, learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov.
We're coming out of the other side. So in many ways, from my point of view, we're on the other side of the mountain. You have to be New York tough, smart, united, disciplined, loving. This is the next big step in this historic journey. We talk about being New York tough and what tough really means. We changed the trajectory dramatically by what we did. What we have done thus far is really amazing, and that was smart, but we have to stay smart.
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz, and I'm really kind of thrilled because I'm going to go over to Soundview and say hello to my newfound friend, George Colon. George is a former teacher, but he's an author. He has a number of books. We're going to talk about all his books, including a relatively new one. And so, hey, George, how are you?
Oh, I am just absolutely fabulous, Gary. Thank you. Hope you're well, too.
Yes, we certainly are. The weather is nice. I know we're in the middle of a very difficult time for all of us, but, we try to keep our hopes up as best as we can. So, George, let's give folks a little bit of background about you. You grew up in the Bronx. I know you to say that you're passionate about our borough would be an understatement. Talk a little bit about, where you've been and what you've done in our home borough of the Bronx.
Okay, well, I am not Bronx born, but Bronx bred. I was born in Puerto Rico many years ago. Came to the Bronx early 1950s, went to public school here all my life, and I taught high school English for 30 years.
And what schools? Can we say what schools you taught at?
Okay, I started at South Bronx High School. I passed through the Bronx High School of Science, and I ended my career at Adlai Stevenson High School, my last 12 years.
Mm-hmm. Before you go on, because if you're talking about Bronx high schools, that's heart and soul to a lot of people. Just some summary about what you learned or what it was like to teach in high school. Was it rewarding? Was it difficult? Just give us some characterization of those many years you spent in Bronx classrooms.
Well, it was for the most part very, very rewarding. I like to think that I touched the lives of my students. I was a friend, a father, at times a mother. I gave them compassion and touched their lives. But teachers do more, I taught. It did get a little difficult at the end, when they started breaking the high schools into smaller units, which was perhaps necessary, but it did create problems. And
let me interject on that. So what they did was they broke up the high schools, in many cases put 3 or 4 in one building, and it broke up that core. In the old days when you and I were younger, you're a Clinton man and I'm a Clinton man as well. When we were younger, you'd say Clinton or you'd say Roosevelt or you'd say, Walton, whatever it was, that meant something. Now all of a sudden didn't quite mean something, and people, and nothing against anything new or, innovative, but you lost a little identity. Do I have that right?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do, Gary. It's like a poem I read. Too many cooks in the kitchen spoil the dish. Too many captains on a ship spoil the voyage, and that's how it was with all these different principles.
Right.
Now, to some extent, it was necessary because, the high schools were huge. And then when the kids came in from their feeder junior high school, they got lost, and that contributed, to the high dropout rate. But
yeah, George, we don't have to debate the concept. Believe me, I've done it enough. When they introduced it, I was on TV and we talked about it, and we could still talk about how it works. Of course, now we're in a different era because of distance learning and all that kind of stuff. But I think your point is very well taken, that what was had to be changed, and young people, it was tougher for teachers. You had 4 principals in the building. My goodness, how could you deal with it? Anyway, when did you start writing? I mean, I'm going to mention the names of books: A Bronx Teacher Saga, The Triumphs and Tribulations of a Puerto Rican English Teacher, To Kill a President, The Bronx Teacher's Travels, and Confessions of a Rogue Teacher. Those are all the previous books. When did you start writing, and why did you start writing?
Well, there's a great German poet named Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke, and Rilke says that we write because we have a need to write, and that's why I wrote. I had a need, to tell my stories, especially, my teacher stories. And it was after I retired, with no more lessons to plan, no more compositions to grade. I had a lot of time. And that's when I really, got started. And I've been at it for the last 12 years. And yes, I've written, I self-published 5 books, all of them about the Bronx, including A Bronx Teacher's Travels. It begins with my journeys in the Bronx. From England, Russia, China, Egypt. And then, of course, my memoir is about teaching. And, above all, I had a need to tell the story of my borough. That's my last book, A Bronx Tapestry, which is a very personal history of my borough. And, like the painter Rembrandt, he puts himself in one of his paintings on the crucifixion, he puts himself at the foot of the cross, and that's what I do. I put myself at the foot of Bronx history. Yes.
You're the type of guy, and I don't know you that long, but just from writing and some of the other things, I would be surprised if you wrote anything that you didn't give wasn't really a personal tale. You know what I mean? If you're, and I'm going to read the title again. If you're talking about a Bronx Teacher Saga, The Triumphs and Tribulations of a Puerto Rican English Teacher, man, that's got to be a personal account. I mean, do I have this right? I mean, do I have you pegged?
Okay. Yes. That's me. They were mostly great moments. They were, great times, especially 1983 South Bronx High School, when 85% of my students passed the English Regents. That is the highlight of my career. And, gradually there were less people passing, and there were, tribulations, yes.
The latest one, you were particularly proud of a visit you made to Baltimore to Edgar Allan Poe's burial site. Talk about why he was an inspiration and what else you put in this brand new book.
Well, he is certainly my favorite American poet, without a doubt. I taught his works, over the course of my career. In fact, his Annabelle Lee was the very first poem I taught. That was back in 1978, and I taught it throughout my career. And his life and his writings have simply, touched the chord ever since I read him first in the 7th grade back in 1961, junior high school 45, with a Mr. Tinker. And Mr. Tinker sort of set the model of how he should be taught. As I said, his emotions, the tragedy, and the pathos of his life have always created the chord. And along with Shakespeare, I love Shakespeare too.
George, before we run out of time, let me just interject about the book as a whole. So a lot of it are things in the Bronx that inspired you as a person, as you grew and developed as a writer. I mean, is that, aside from the Edgar Allan Poe thing, is that the kind of thing that runs throughout the book?
Oh, yes. Jonas Bronk always touches my fancy. Anne Hutchinson, also a great woman who reminds me of my mother and my grandmother.
Okay. Although they don't have rivers or highways named after them.
Hutchinson.
No, Hutchinson does. Your grandmother and your mother probably don't.
Oh, no, they deserve it. They deserve it.
I'm not saying no. So listen, we're almost out of time. You also you wrote about Jordan Mott and a history of a number of things in the Bronx. The book is available on Amazon. In your mind, do you already have the next book ready to go, or are you going to kind of just wait for a little while? You do?
Yes. It's a collection of short stories, South Bronx Tales. It's almost finished. It begins, I quote the German poet Goethe, who appeared to me once in a dream back in 1975 and told me to write. You come back wavering shapes out of the mist in which you first appeared. You crowd, you press. So, yes, I'm going to have a photo of me.
Listen, George, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We do got to run. You will have this book available at some point soon. Do we know when, or we're too soon for that?
Okay, well, maybe in a month or so.
All right. Well, I'm sure you'll let us know all about it. George Cologne, check him out. You can look for his books, his Bronx books on Amazon. And George, thanks for spending a few minutes with us here on the Bronx Buzz. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so very much, Gary. And again, thank you for everything you've done for me, okay?
All right, no problem. Folks, that'll do it for the Bronx Buzz. Don't forget to join us for Bronx Talk this week. 2 different debates, the 15th Congressional District and the 16th Congressional District. That will be on Bronx Talk during regular hours. You'll see it mostly in the evenings. And that's it. Good night. Thanks to Big Steve, our producer, and to George, and also to Patrick, and we'll see you around town. Good night.